Hello, everyone. My name is Eric Zavinski.
I'm Todd Crawford.
We are too cool for the comic shop. And what are we going to be talking about this evening, Todd?
We're talking about the Star Wars prequels, which I think for both of us was probably one of the first movies that either of us had seen. I'm assuming you saw them as a kid, maybe one or two of them in theaters.
Yeah, you're exactly right. This is part 2 of our Star Wars trilogy discussion. If you haven't seen our original trilogy discussion, check back to the last episode because we gave our thoughts on A New Hope, Empire, and Return of the Jedi. Now we'll be talking about The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith. And you're exactly right, Todd. My first experience, I think, with a new movie wasn't in the theater. I was 3 years old in 1999, but I do remember vivid first viewing of The Phantom Menace, and Darth Maul was like the scariest thing I had seen as a 3-year-old at that time. I remember watching it in my bedroom, I think, with my dad, and he's a huge Star Wars fan, and obviously, indoctrinated me with the original trilogy first. But again, I was so young at the time that Phantom Menace was probably one of the first new movies that was newly coming out that I had seen as a kid. Then really wasn't going to the theater until the early 2000s, but I did go see Attack of the Clones in the theaters. I was just so obsessed with Star Wars, even as a young kid, that I think my dad took me to Attack of the Clones at one point. Then my mom took me to see the movie a second time, because that's how much I think I had begged my parents at the time to see it again. And then Revenge of the Sith was like a birthday party for me, because I have a May birthday, and Star Wars movies always used to come out in the month of May. So I think it was my 9th birthday, 2005, and I had some of my closest friends at the time join me in the birthday party at the movie theater, and then at home with cake, we were definitely slapping each other with plastic lightsabers. So I would say, I love all of Star Wars, but the prequel trilogy was definitely the era that I grew up in.
I apologize, I had to yawn. Not because what you're saying was boring, that sounds rude. Just a natural
Your childhood is boring,
yawn.
You Star Wars fanatic.
Yeah, for me, it's fairly similar. So I saw Phantom Menace in theaters, one of the first theatrical experiences that I can recall. That and Toy Story 2. Had on VHS, watched it all the time. I remember one time my dad's car had to go to Walmart. They needed like a tire replacement or something silly like that, and they had it there in the weight room, the Walmart Automotive. I remember watching it in there. I remember I had a Jar Jar Binks nightlight at my grandparents' cabin, their little vacation home. I had lightsaber toys, and I remember going to Taco Bell after seeing Phantom Menace for the first time. It was my first Taco Bell memory, so a very special occasion. And I remember
What gave you more gas, the Phantom Menace or Taco Bell?
I'm gonna say I was pretty gassed up about the Phantom Menace. I don't remember Taco Bell making as big of an impression, except I think that binoculars where you could kind of click and it'd be like different frames from the movie, so you see different stills, and that was really exciting. I think that might have even been why I wanted to go there. But
it's funny that you bring up the merch, because I think the toy line that I remember, one of them that I remember most vividly, Revenge of the Sith, did little Burger King stuffed toys, and there was like 100 of them, and we kept getting Burger King that year to try to collect them all, and they're probably somewhere in my parents' house still.
It's a lot of Burger King. Do you remember the Mountain Dew cans for Phantom Menace? Or was that a little bit too...
I do not.
Oh, that was one of the...
I didn't like Mountain Dew until like way later in life, so that might be why.
I remember they had Jar Jar on the Mountain Dew, and they had Qui-Gon and Princess Amidala, and that was like the hypest stuff. It was so cool drinking your Mountain Dew with Phantom Menace characters on it. And
yeah, especially the Jar Jar Binks Mountain Dew. I wonder how much a preserved can of that goes for these days.
Yeah, I look back, and I wish I kept one just as a silly memorability to be like, remember this? Like that we have the sequel trilogy mandarins, I think, or the oranges that they sell that just has like a Star Wars label on it.
Oh yeah. I remember having a like talking, dancing Jar Jar Binks figure that definitely existed. You would press a button and he would like it was just like a figure and he would like wobble back and forth. So I think the prequels, if they merchandised, from a revolutionary merchandising standpoint, the original films, the prequels just turned it up to 11, I think. But, it was a more toy-centric culture, 20, 25 years later.
Yeah. Well, on that note, the Attack of the Clones I saw twice up until this year in full. Actually, it's somewhat untrue, but I'd seen it twice in full. I'd seen like maybe half here, half there up until this year. And I saw it not in theaters, but it's rented on VHS. And when I started watching, I fell asleep. And I didn't get it. Like, I was so excited. And then I watched it one more time right before the third movie came out. And I just didn't really have thoughts on it. It's just like, oh. And obviously, that's not we'll get to more in-depth thoughts at that point, but just to get through a brief history. So then, Revenge of the Sith, I saw at the drive-thru, or the drive-in. And I remember that was a big experience. I remember talking on the bus stops, who was going to live, who's going to die. I remember the toys being everywhere at that point, the Lego sets and everything. And I remember that theatrical experience pretty well.
Is that your first drive-in movie theater experience?
No, I went all the time as a kid. I was kind of a bonding thing my mom liked to do. She always liked taking us to the drive-in with one of our friends or something.
It's funny that, there are some of those like very, momentous childhood movie moments. And I saw The Dark Knight for the first time in a drive-in, and you saw Revenge of the Sith for the first time in a drive-in. So it's kind of cool to hear stuff like that. It definitely makes for a very memorable experience.
Yeah. And honestly, for me as a kid, I only really liked The Phantom Menace. I liked parts of the third one, and the second I didn't much care for at all. But for me, I loved The Phantom Menace. That was one of my first favorite movies. But it was still definitely culturally just a huge part of my childhood.
Well, yeah, I guess we should, delve into the meat and potatoes of episode 1, The Phantom Menace, at this point. That's definitely the first prequel, so I think it takes the most flack. I don't think it deserves the most criticism of the three. So I'm curious what you think the modern day, having rewatched them, because this definitely got an unorthodox structure, especially compared to the other Star Wars movies. But to be honest, I don't think there's that much that this movie does egregiously wrong. So what do you think?
Yeah, I pretty much agree. I mean, I have to say, like, I have such fond memories of it. I never wanted to watch it as an adult because I felt like I would preserve those happy memories. But rewatching it, I still enjoyed it quite a bit. I still had a good time. I think especially after like Return of the Jedi, whereas I liked that a little bit less than I remembered. I think that made me a little more soft on this movie with some things, especially in the sense that like I just approached it as the start of a new trilogy, and it's a kids movie. It's not for 26, nearly 27-year-old Todd Crawford. It was for 5-year-old Todd Crawford. And quite frankly, as a kids movie, I think it's a lot of fun. I think the filmmaking's great generally. I mean, I know there's criticisms about Qui-Gon. I like his character in it. I think he is a memorable character. I do think he has
for me, he's the driving force of this whole movie. Honestly, he's my favorite part.
Yeah, and I think Liam Neeson's, obviously he's a great actor and he's good in it. I think I have loved Jar Jar as a kid. I always hear people like red letter media types say, oh, well, this movie's for kids, but kids wouldn't like a movie about the Trade Federation. They won't like Jar Jar. But speaking as a kid of that generation, I did. You're speaking for kids as a 30-year-old man or whatever, not as a kid. And like kids like fart jokes. They like Jar Jar stepping in CGI poop. It's not highbrow. I'm not saying it's the best comedy ever. I'm not saying it holds up for me as an adult. But I can watch it knowing that as a kid I loved it. And if I was a kid or showing it to my nephew who's one now, in 2 or 3 years, he'd probably like that movie.
Right. And honestly, we're more than 20 years into the future now, and the level of cringe that we get in some kids' movies these days are like nowhere in comparison to the stuff that the Phantom Menace has. It really doesn't bother me. I have a pretty high tolerance for stuff like that. But yeah, I definitely liked Jar Jar as a kid, and that's probably what the Ewoks are like for people who were kids at that time. It's kind of draws some comparisons there. It's just that the Ewoks feel out of place because it's like the end of a trilogy and it's like the story is ramping up. Whereas Jar Jar is a major character in the first movie in this trilogy, and he is sprinkled very sparingly in the next two, almost to the point where he's not even a supporting character, right? So, you know, I think A, it's a kid's movie, but B, it's the pretty humble beginning to a new story. The Phantom Menace, I don't even think you meet Anakin until like 40, 45 minutes into the film.
No, you really don't. And that's one thing too, is that like I think removing the film from the hype, removing it from expectations and watching it on its own, I really don't think it's half as bad as people say. And you know, I'll openly say I'm biased in favor of the movie, but I also think many people are biased to, you know, look down on the movie or to be too negative.
Right.
But one thing I really like with the movies is it feels self-contained and almost to the point of a fault with the overall trilogy. But watching it as an individual film, I like that it doesn't feel like part of a trilogy. Kind of like A New Hope, where A New Hope just feels like a blockbuster movie. That's really kind of how this feels. It just feels like a family movie for the most part. I watched as a kid, and I never thought, like, what's going to happen next? What's the next movie? I just thought, this is a great movie. I love this.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I think almost all three trilogies do that to a point where it doesn't feel like you're watching a continuous saga until the second film in each of the three trilogies, to be honest. They are very self-contained experiences. You know, Darth Maul is the flesh and blood present villain that gets defeated at the end of the film. And when you compare it to the other two prequels, Anakin is a, you know, grown young adult in the other two films. So that 10-year gap between episodes 1 and 2 also makes it feel very much self-contained, and it frankly is. There's an expanded canon to Star Wars, and there's not even that many stories through comics or what have you in between episodes 1 and 2, because it's just kind of I guess you could say it's a more boring time than most eras in the Skywalker saga.
Yeah, and I like that about it. I like that it's kind of its own thing, but I will say that, and this gets to my biggest issue with the movie overall. And one thing I'm going to say is I refuse to criticize, I think Jake Lloyd is the name of the child actor, because he was a kid and he was thrust into this major thing that, quite frankly, a lot of people cared about more than they cared about humanity or someone's childhood. And I'm morally against child acting in general, even though I like a lot of my favorite movies feature child actors. I just got done watching The Wonder Years a few months ago, child actors through the whole show. I think it's child abuse, more or less. I'm really against it. I think it fucks people up. And
it usually does.
And I don't like being like, yeah, this kid sucks. You know, I think that's just wrong. Or like, the kid's irritating. Like, I don't like that. But I will say that if I could change one thing about the movie, Anakin would have been roughly 18 years old. Not the acting thing even, but it would have made more sense in the movie where he builds the pod racer, he builds C-3PO. His character arc would have felt a little more. I would have liked him spending more time with Obi-Wan as an adult and getting to see that, so that by the third movie, you know, when they're at odds with each other, it's more tragic. Because I do think there's a weird disconnect between the movies in that way, where Anakin's essentially a different character in each one. But
right, I would say that, you know, I think there's little tweaks that can be done to the story to make it just feel more immersive. Like, for instance, Anakin is a slave, but since this is a kid's movie, his version of being a slave is like tinkering with machines, and like they have a house and they don't really get punished for things, and it's like the most laid back slavery I've ever seen, right? But it's a kid's movie, so what are you gonna do, right? And then in that same effect, I think Anakin is like a 9-year-old because you're trying to relate to your target audience. You know, if it was even a teenager, I don't think that effect would have come across. So I understand why everything is the way it is, but I also hear your points.
Yeah.
I think that's part of Star Wars's problem, you could say, or maybe it's not really a problem, but more or less a challenge to relate to every single possible demographic, right? Because Star Wars is all ages and it's for everyone.
Exactly.
It's kind of hard to write a story like that.
And that is the thing. But how I feel about Anakin being a kid is like Stephen King's The Shining. He doesn't like Stanley Kubrick's version. And people say, "Oh, well, you know, the book's different than the movie, and if it would have been made as the book is, it would have been a better movie." And I say, "Well, that movie does exist. Stephen King wrote a miniseries that was filmed for The Shining with the plot he wanted, and it sucked ass. It blew, and nobody remembers it. So Kubrick won." So like, how I feel with Anakin being a kid, like I totally get what you mean, like marketing wise, like on paper, but how I feel too is like, we have that Anakin, and it was one of the least successful attempts to connect with an audience. Overall, like as a kid, it didn't bother me. So you're right there. But I also think like, even as an adult with that nostalgia factor, I'm still like, I wish they would have went for the more artistic choice. I mean, not artistic, but like logical choice for the story.
Right. You're asking the fantastical world of Star Wars to be logical, and like that's already a stretch, right?
Yeah, it's asking quite a bit, especially at this point in the series.
Right. Go over some of the things that I like about the movie. Some of the stuff that I more have recently appreciated as an older person was some of the stuff that I hated when I was a kid. And I do think this movie has a pacing issue. I think that's probably its biggest actual flaw. Because you jump around from Jedi slashing battle droids, people talking about politics. And then, oh, we're on Tatooine and we're doing Anakin and Padre stuff. And then we're talking about politics. And it's just got an ebb and flow to the movie that is really kind of jarring for a kid, because I remember watching The Phantom Menace over and over and over again, and I really would get to the point where I would like fast forward the parts on Coruscant or fast forward some of the stuff in the early Naboo part, because it just wasn't that interesting. But then a lot of the other parts of the movie are absurdly interesting in terms of the action and the spectacle. But I will say, at the same time, as an adult, some of those slower points I appreciate a heck of a lot more. And there's a lot of character weight to them. Like for Anakin being so young, one of my favorite scenes in the movie is when he's talking to his mom. He says, "Mom, you said that the biggest problem in the universe is that no one ever helps each other." And then that's the conversation that leads to him doing the pod race so that they can all like leave the planet. So from the very beginning, you can see like Anakin's positive qualities of selflessness and wanting to be a hero. And that's pretty touching. But as a kid, like, I think it was just a little over my head. But viewing it as an older person, I like it. It's got a good message. And a lot of the talks that Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan have on Coruscant are very interesting. They get into the dogma of the Jedi, gets into why Qui-Gon is such an interesting character. Because think about if Qui-Gon had survived this movie, he would have been like staunchly opposed against the Clone Wars, I think. And he would have been more of a father figure to Anakin, probably preventing the cycle of the whole series of Anakin falling to the dark side. And one of my favorite analyses of this film, to get into some of the symbolic significance, is that the Duel of the Fates at the end of the film, you know, a lot of people argue that, oh, it's not really that important. You know, Darth Maul is just cannon fodder. It doesn't really matter. But when you look at it in the sense of Qui-Gon died in this fight, so the Sith essentially took the one father figure that Anakin could have had away from him, which essentially dooms him to the darkness for the entire rest of the saga. Actually, a lot more significant than perhaps it seems on paper. So I was wondering if any of these things like made you think more as like watching it when you're older.
Yeah, no, not so much. What I looked for more rewatching this was parallels with the original trilogy, And, you know, like in this one, for instance, it's interesting because a lot of it kind of parallels Return of the Jedi, right? So the ending, particularly with the funeral pyre of Qui-Gon now instead of Darth Vader. And
Right.
the Emperor's theme is played, but it's played in like an upbeat, like almost parade type thing at the ending. So even though it's a happy scene and it's very reminiscent of A New Hope's ending, it casts this dark shadow over it, even though you yourself, the audience, doesn't consciously pick up on it. The back of your mind hopefully registers by being so familiar with Star Wars. Hey, this is the Emperor's theme, but this is a happy scene. What's going on?
Right.
And I was looking for little, you know, just stuff like that, and just generally just watching, getting a feel for it as an audience member at my age. But I agree with all the stuff on Qui-Gon. One thing I got to bring up, because Qui-Gon's brought up, because it's Phantom Menace, so we have to, is the midichlorians. And one point I want to make about it, because like I see kind of both sides on it, where on one hand it does like kind of nullify the Force, and it's a weird concept that I don't totally get and I don't really give a shit about, and it kind of makes the Force less interesting. On the other hand, I watched the documentary just because it was on, I think it was on Prime, The People versus George Lucas, and someone was talking and saying like, you know, the Force used to be this thing that anybody could get by having enough faith and all this, but now only certain people can be Jedi, so I can't be a Jedi. And I just want to point out how fucking stupid and childish that shit is. Like, you're not, right? Guess what? You can't be a Jedi. I hate that argument, like, especially like movies like Captain Marvel or whatever, where it's like, or Black Panther, where it's like, this movie shows little kids that they can be superheroes. I'm like, yeah, but they can't.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you on that. That's definitely petty and childish. I will say that I don't think this film does a good job at explaining the Force. Like, there are moments of pretty cool Force stuff. Like, I love it when Qui-Gon sits down to meditate before the duel with him and Darth Maul finishes. Like, for me, that is Force stuff that I gravitate to. That's stuff that's very interesting and relatable and centered on mindfulness and all of that. When they have the midichlorian scene, kind of gamify the Force in a way like, oh, he has more midichlorians than Yoda has. And I think that's kind of what bothers people. I don't think it would bother people as much if they just said something vague like, you know, midichlorians are these like microscopic beings, and like the Force moves through all living things, right? So this is just another microscopic Force moves through. That's essentially how I interpreted it. It doesn't really bother me at all. It's just like, I don't know, is the human body more or less interesting when you know about like the inner quantum workings of it? And I guess your mileage will vary. I don't really think it's like a thing to be upset about, though.
Yeah, like, I don't know how I choose to interpret it, and I'm probably misinterpreting, is like, so the midichlorians aren't explained fully enough that you have the set thing that I remember and I listened for it. So like, let's say you get more midichlorians, the more Force you're susceptible to. Or maybe because of, you know, fate or whatever, people who are going to be more adept at the Force already have the midichlorians, so it's predetermined. Or you can kind of look at it that way, and honestly it's me trying to excuse it to be more okay with it. But for me, it was just kind of like, just a stupid thing that makes the lore a little bit shittier, but it wasn't like, I'm going to tear my hair out and my eyes are now bloodshot from having seen it. It's more like,
I mean, I think it's one of those parts of the prequels that is just another concept that we have to wrap our minds around, and it's kind of underdeveloped. And there are other underdeveloped concepts throughout the entire trilogy that we'll get into when we talk about the other films. But yeah, it doesn't like ruin anything for me. And there's expanded media where they do talk about it more and kind of make it better and more logical. I'm not going to get into that on this podcast because this is again about the movie experience and what people take out of that. But again, I think it's a very minor gripe. Yeah, I mean, I guess other parts of the movie that we haven't talked about are probably the parts that don't need to be talked about. like this is a 1999 film, yet the pod race and the final lightsaber duel and anything with space combat and even Jar Jar. I mean, like all of the special effects in this movie and the choreography is fucking excellent. And I think that's something that just has not changed, and that makes me feel as cool watching it as a kid as it does as an adult. And I just don't feel like that has changed, and I think that's something that the movie has to be commended for, because it was a pioneer in a new brand of special effect movie making.
Yeah, I agree. I think the pod race scene and the Duel of the Fates both hold up very well. I think that the Duel of the Fates scene, the weird room with the doors that lock up and then open through force fields, that's weird and kind of illogical, but I just don't question it. I just see it as this operatic scene that, you know, like it should make sense. You know, we should understand the architecture of the building and why it does this, but I just accept it. And I think if you do that, it's still a lot of fun. And the thing with me about the pod race is fascinating is how Lucas, it's a great example of his filmmaking style, where it's very documentarian. It's very inspired by classic Hollywood, by like Ben-Hur, and it does these zoom-ins and stuff like that I just think is very indicative of his character, and I really appreciated that watching it more grown up. And another thing I want to bring up while he's talking about the aesthetics of the film is that as far as the Lucas era goes, this is the last Star Wars shot on film.
Right. And the last one in the 20th century.
And quite frankly, I think it looks good. Like, there's some stuff, obviously, not all the CGI holds up, but it's mostly like the creatures. There's a few scenes that the backgrounds aren't quite as good. You know, like the big field where they have the battle at the end. I actually believe it wasn't just a lazy CGI creation. There was some weird way it was made that I heard about, but it just does not look good. I'll just leave it. It just doesn't look good. Whatever, however it was done, it's not an interesting landscape. It looks like the Windows background.
Yeah, no, I can agree with that. That's definitely like the least interesting of the four things going on at the end of the film. I always liked that. And that's another thing that we can compare Return of the Jedi to The Phantom Menace. Both of the finales in these films, they end with like multiple battles going on at once. So in Return of the Jedi, you have the Endor stuff, the space stuff, and the Luke and Vader stuff. And then for The Phantom Menace, you have the Duel of the Fates, the Gungans on the field of battle, the space battle with Anakin and Padme and her guard trying to take back Naboo. And there's just something about the kinetic energy of how well they cut back and forth between fight scenes that just feels so epic. Because as a kid, I was always amazed at just like the scope of everything. Like, oh my gosh, all four of these things are happening at once, and they all kind of reach their climax around the same time. And I think that's just really good filmmaking, that there aren't too many action movies that even do that, where they jump from scene to scene to scene, back and forth. It's just amazing. It's amazing editing.
Yeah, I agree. I think oh shoot, I was gonna bring something else up that wasn't quite with this, and I'm really trying to remember before I forget it. Whatever it was, it's lost on me. But oh yeah, I remember now. Speaking of the Gungan climax part, are you familiar with the theory about Jar Jar being the Phantom Menace?
Yes, it's a funny joke, but obviously I don't subscribe to that theory.
I think it's one of those things where, like, you know, like every good lie is a half truth. And I think like the drunken monkey style, the unexpected master that Lucas is clearly fond of is a factor in it. I think Jar Jar was supposed to be a much larger part of the narrative as it went on, and clearly his effect on the overall universe is negative within the universe, not just with fan reception, because he helps Palpatine get total power. But I think, and it's funny because people say that Lucas didn't listen to criticism of these movies. He's just doing whatever he wants and not what fans want. But quite frankly, I think it's the opposite. I think he did. I don't think he knew how to continue the series with Phantom Menace. I think he was finding his footing and trying to reconnect with youth that maybe he didn't quite connect with anymore. But in terms of like just generational differences. Like he did for me, but I don't know. Maybe he did with the whole generation. I can't speak for that. But anyhow, I think with the next few movies, I think he did listen to fans, and I think he did improve on the flaws of each prior movie with the most recent one in this trilogy.
I think so as well. And honestly, The Phantom Menace is a very unique experience. If you compare it to the rest of the saga, it definitely stands out. So I can see people, some people think Phantom Menace is their favorite part of the prequel trilogy. For some people, it's their least favorite part of it. But whichever way it goes, it is different enough, especially from episodes 2 and 3, to really, kind of warrant that experience. And no, it's just kind of a pleasant movie. It doesn't feel like the world is going to end kind of movie, where the next two movies are obviously a lot darker for very good reason. It's just kind of a nice movie. It is a kids movie. It's got a lot of entertaining parts, and it gets the spectacle of Star Wars down really well, I think, especially for a new era. And just as all of with the prequels, to go back to the lightsaber fights real quick, I just kind of view lightsaber duels in this series, especially in the prequel trilogy, it's kind of a dance of like color, motion, like emotion and motion. They each duel is like trying to communicate something different, and that's something that we see with the rest of the series. And definitely like broad brush strokes. It's that kind of film. I still think it holds up mostly. So my question for you is, you seem pretty positive on the film. Do you like it more or less than Return of the Jedi?
I had a better time watching The Return of the Jedi this most recent time, but I think Return of the Jedi is a better film. I mean, I'm not blind. Like, when I'm speaking this movie, I'm speaking purely from the heart. Like, I'm not going to pretend like it's the best Star Wars movie or anything, but for me, it's the film that got me into Star Wars. It is one of the defining films of my childhood. I connect with it more in Return of the Jedi, but I think the Luke Vader stuff, of course, is much better. I think.
Right. And such a different set of expectations, right? Because I think Return of the Jedi can be frustrating when you want certain things from it, whereas The Phantom Menace, while it might be a good film, there's not as many like highbrow expectations for what's going to go on. So you can probably have like, seems like you have more favoritism to it, like personally, but can still acknowledge that it's not a better film.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you summed it up pretty well, because the third film, it's a trilogy cap, whereas this is beginning something anew. So I don't have those same expectations going into this. It's the beginning of a new series, and I do think this prequel trilogy it's a new world. It's a totally different universe than the original Star Wars trilogy, which I don't think people liked. And in some ways, it's a more irritating universe. It's a more juvenile universe. It's kind of a weird creation. I like it. I think it's fascinating and unique and sometimes cringy and embarrassing, but I like what Lucas did with this, and I think that him and his creative team just built this entire new... They redefined the Star Wars universe, the galaxy as we knew it. And I think with the EU and all that, and my limited knowledge of it, I think actually the prequels did the bulk of the heavy lifting, even to this day, with really just expanding and opening things up. But ultimately, I mean, I'll always love Phantom Menace for all that it did for me in my life and getting me into film. But I've grown up. I see some of the, some of the imperfections. But I'm ready to give it a rating if you are.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll let you go first.
I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. Yeah, I don't have much more to say about it off the top of my head. I think it's a solid 7.5. It's a fun movie, but it's got a lot of flaws.
Yeah, no, I can agree with that on an objective standpoint. I'd give it an 8 if I was feeling generous, but 7.5 sounds pretty on the money for me as well. And, I don't know. It's hard to say what you would change about a movie like this, especially with Star Wars and everything ties together. Because if you change one movie, then you're, inadvertently changing other films. So I could sit here and say, well, I would change this and this. Trickle effect of that is like, there's drawbacks to, things that I might want finessed a little differently.
I would
than Phantom Menace, but overall, it was a very important movie, and I think it definitely, for the most part, I think it achieves what it was setting out to achieve, which was introduce Star Wars to a new audience and usher in some, new types of filmmaking.
Leading into Attack of the Clones, the one thing that I would change with Phantom Menace is the line, "Are you an angel?" And unfortunately, we get a lot more of that in the following movie.
No, you know what? I'm not going to beat around the bush. Attack of the Clones is definitely my least favorite of the prequel trilogy. It's actually my least favorite of the 9 Star Wars films because I feel like it is the most clunky. Would you agree with the clunky statement?
It's not just clunky, but I mean, we think of Star Wars as this huge thing with endless possibilities. But really, at least as far as the cinematic universe is concerned, in terms of like big movies and theaters, we really begin to see how limited it actually is in this movie too. So not only is it the clunkiest, it's one of the least original films in the Star Wars franchise, where you could tell that they're doing the Empire thing, where it's the 2 leads split up, and the one's on it's kind of a romantic adventure, and by the end, the main character getting the arm cut off, and the more downer ending that's a bit of a cliffhanger leading into the 3rd one, which I don't totally mind, but when they're just repeating some things from the original trilogy, doing them worse, it's not the best to watch. There's a lot I agree about this movie, though, to be fair.
Yeah, no, there are things I like. There are things I like in every single Star Wars film, or pretty much anything Star Wars in general. There's some pretty universal qualities that everything Star Wars has, right? But this movie is a long film, and so much of the runtime is dedicated to perhaps things that it shouldn't be dedicated to. For instance, with the splitting up of the characters, you have 2 of your 3 main characters basically doing bad Shakespeare in the Park. It's probably the best way I can describe it. I am one of probably the in the minority actually enjoy the casting of Natalie Portman and Hayden Christensen as their respective roles, but not all the time. But that's mostly due to the script. I think it's due to the direction and the writing that kind of squanders these actors' ability. Yeah. So, I mean, this love relationship, it's very crucial to the saga, right? Like, it needs to be present. The execution of it is just always cringy. And I think it even was to me as a kid, honestly.
I was boring to me as a kid. As an adult, it's very cringy, and the worst thing
about it, you hit the nail on the head. It was boring as a kid, and it's cringy as an adult. So I guess it's almost gotten better with age, because at least we can laugh at it.
Yeah. So, like, one thing I got to bring up that's kind of heartbreaking too is, like, Lucas's framing in this movie kicks ass. Like, there's shots in it that are fucking beautiful, but it's got like
it's a beautiful film.
But like, it's got like this horrendous CGI landscapes where like they're walking out of a room, the chairs just look like a PlayStation 2 game. and like
there were several PlayStation 2 games from this era, so it works out.
Well, the thing is too is like it's very impressive. I mean, I give this film a lot of credit and a lot of leeway because, quite frankly, it kind of invented modern cinema, and people don't want to like talk about that. And I could just be talking on my butt, but like this was one of the first big blockbuster shot, all on digital. It kick-started that. The CGI creations and all that, they don't look the best, but this was one of the first films to just fucking do it. And even though
you're completely right. You're not wrong. I can't think of many other films that are like this. I think this was a 2002 film. So what other movies came out like within a year of that? Spider-Man, The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. Like, but other than those, like those were the contemporaries. But Attack of the Clones obviously is doing more lifting than either of those films in terms of creations, the worlds, the creatures, like the team on this film and all the stuff they had to create is, you know, objectively remarkable.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like
Especially for the time.
The funny thing is like it may not be good art, but it's innovative. And it may not be like tasteful, but it's groundbreaking. And that's kind of the thing I have to give a lot of credit to this movie with. Another thing I give a lot of credit with is that the first and third act are both pretty fun. It's still not my favorite stuff in the trilogy, but I think it's perfectly watchable. The middle section...
I would go a step further. I would say in the second act, what keeps me going is the fun stuff that Obi-Wan gets to do.
That's very true.
Because, like, the middle chunk of the movie, the second act is like an hour and a half long. Like, but that second chunk of the movie, everything Anakin and Padme does is very boring or cringy.
Yeah,
there's definitely important plot that happens there, but it's not the most fun to watch. But here, Obi-Wan is just kicking back, kicking Jango Fett off rooftops, and like getting exploded with seismic charges and asteroid belts and stuff. So at least it knows how to string you along, especially the kid viewer. Because they know the rest of the movie is kind of boring for a young audience. So because those are the reasons. All the spectacle is why I wanted to go back and see Attack of the Clones like a second time in the theater as a kid. So like, I knew how to play the mind games. It just doesn't make for an overall great movie.
Yeah, well, you bring up two good points there. The first is that, for me at least, like the asteroid belt, once again going back to the Empire comparisons. And, you know, Lucas says himself, you got this, I think ring theory is called, or circle theory with the fans, that things repeat themselves. Some sort of the Force or mythological thing. I don't know. It's a fun theory. I'm not saying it's true or canon, but...
George Lucas likes to rhyme things. He likes poetry. He likes parallelism. Absolutely. He's obsessed with it, I would say.
Yeah, and that stuff's awesome. Like, I'm the same way because I'm OCD, so I tell the same story with slight variations.
Boba Fett is in this middle installment in the original trilogy and in the prequel trilogy. He's just a kid here.
But, like, once again, I mean, some of the stuff, like the asteroid belt stuff's fun in this. I like it still, but just not quite as good and not that big of a twist on it. As opposed to, like, in this one, he hides on an asteroid instead of hiding on the Star Destroyer, whatever the fuck it's called, the big ship. Like, it's the same thing, and like, I'm all for parallelism and all those like artistic things, but I feel like some more thought. It could have been done more cleverly.
But again, if these movies are, if you want kids to make kind of connections like that, you know, one could argue that maybe the point was to not do it more cleverly, right? I think some of the stuff that I like to see, even if they are repeating some of the same strokes in these movies, is the effects team is just constantly trying to innovate and do completely different things. Like, you have a dogfight in this asteroid belt scene with two completely different ships that you've never seen go at it, a kind of A-wing shaped Jedi Starfighter and the Slave One, like actually doing shit instead of just like soaring around. But that's really cool. The sound design on like the charges that like make the movie go silent and then they, you know, blast outward like an ellipse, like shit like that is super innovative in terms of like visuals and the sound. So if the story is like repeating broad strokes, at least the other details are bolstered to a new level.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'm trying to think. Yeah, the Obi-Wan stuff, like the noir stuff, is fun. I mean, let's be real. Like the big issue of this movie is that Anakin and Padme are not interesting, and their love story sucks, and the actors have no chemistry. I think that's improved like 1,000-fold in the next movie. It's still not great, but like it's not the worst thing ever. But in this movie, it is just paint drying, and unfortunately, it's paint drying with bad romantic dialogue. But what's maybe even more tragic to me is that the stuff with Anakin interacting with Obi-Wan is fun, and the beginning of the third movie, without getting too far into that, ahead of myself, I want to see more of that. And you get that over at the beginning of this when they're trying to catch the assassin. All that stuff to me is exciting. It's fun. And one thing I really do not like in this film is when Anakin just hates Obi-Wan. I know he's supposed to be like a teenager. It's supposed to be that way. But he's like,
Right.
he's just holding me back, and just like the most obvious rebellious teen dialogue, just so on the nose, and just delivered like a high school play. Worse than a high school play, because at least in my high school, the kids were very talented in those. I went to see all of them, and I enjoyed them, and they were fantastic. But a bad high school play.
Right. No, I definitely, it's kind of like, it's just jarring, right? Because there are other moments in the movie where Anakin is like, seemingly truthfully, like singing Obi-Wan's praises, and he's like, he's powerful as Mace Windu and as wise as Master Yoda. And it's like, okay, tell me how you really feel.
Yeah, it's like this weird bipolar thing, and like, I get that he's supposed to be conflicted, but not... They could do a little more nuance.
Right. It could have been finessed. That's going to be the term I keep using. Like, it could have been finessed a little more.
With that
like,
said, I'll give a positive.
Yeah, do it.
The stuff with his mother, Smee, and her getting raped to death by sand people. I think that's tragic. It's heartbreaking, and I think that's compelling and makes Anakin's descent into the dark side understandable and tragic.
Right.
And like that works incredibly well to me, and it's still like, I have a thing with moms dying in movies. It just like I've never seen What's Eating Gilbert Grape, and I'm not even sure. I'm pretty sure the mom dies. I don't know, and I just don't want
I watched that movie a long time ago. I can't remember.
Yeah, I just feel like she does. It's like a more realistic movie, and it's like I just can't fucking handle that stuff. But so like in this movie,
that's the one middle act Anakin moment that is very important and very well done, I would say. Because like that's where like the actual story weight, I think, is taken on for his character. He's part of this order of galactic knights that can wage war across the entire galaxy, but they're still not powerful enough to save one slave circumstance, essentially. Just, getting raided by sand people, and an outer rim planet, and they don't police stuff like that. And then, years pass and she just dies. So, I mean, it definitely not only, puts him in a dark place, but definitely sows disenchantment with the Jedi Order, which is basically what the Prequel Trilogy is about, I think, in a large sense. It's about the rise of the Empire, but it's also about the Jedi are so flawed that they would let things happen.
Yeah, exactly. And I think people took umbrage with that back in the day, like, oh, Jedi are supposed to be awesome. Why are they making mistakes? But there had to be a reason that they were non-existent.
Get to that with the sequel trilogy as well, but Jesus Christ. I don't understand why people want their heroes to be perfect paragons of character and just constant 100% moral high ground. Because I don't know about you, Todd, but I don't think that makes for very interesting storytelling, does it?
No, I mean, personally, I can't relate to good people. So that's a barrier.
Well, there you
go. But like, seriously, like, I mean, I think there's definitely some lines you shouldn't cross that can be too far for a character where the audience may no longer relate for certain kinds of movies. Like, Star Wars should generally play it safe with the protagonist, of course, because it's a mainstream blockbuster movie. So you want, like you said earlier, you want the widest possible audience you can get, which I want to get to that for this film after I make this point. But on the other hand, yeah, I mean, they have to make mistakes. They have to be compelling, because otherwise they just do the right thing all the time. It's just boring. It's just a video game.
I think Obi-Wan Kenobi is a perfect example of it, where he does the right thing maybe 98% of the time. And then he'll do some like bad shit where he like lied to Luke about his dad, or he didn't do the right thing with Anakin in one of the Clone Wars episodes or something. Like, I think Obi-Wan's a great example where he is like top tier Jedi and he's got a really good character arc, but he has some flaws, right? So when he has a few flaws, when he's usually so great, I think that makes it all the more heartbreaking when things do go bad. So I would say they usually play it very well, but
yeah, I think Ewan, I don't know how to say his name, Ewan McGregor.
Ewan McGregor's pretty,
I think he's good in all of these, but especially the third, but definitely like seeing him come into his own in this one with the beard and everything's nice.
Oh, absolutely. He's just got a lot more personality. But yeah, I think you alluded to this. Some of my favorite parts of this film are just Anakin and Obi-Wan's like bickering back and forth. One of my favorite lines in the movie is when they are dragging Anakin and Padme into the Geonosis gladiator arena, and Anakin's like, "Yeah, we came here to rescue you," and Obi-Wan just looks up at his shackles and he's like, "Good job."
Oh yeah, yeah, and,
just stuff like that is just such a. I grew up with a younger brother, so just kind of getting little digs at each other like that is just so beautiful and relatable, and it always makes me laugh.
Yeah, and that's where the film does get, like, I like the climax, but I like the part where they're in the weird robot conveyor belt. It's like a big homage to Metropolis. I like that stuff. I think that's fun. The Coliseum stuff's pretty fun. I think the movie goes too big in some places, and like the scope gets so large that sometimes I get kind of lost in it, and like that's what it's for. You want to see the Jedi War. You want to see 4 monsters and tons of people, like
right,
Roman Coliseum or whatever, but like it's just too much for me personally, but I do still enjoy it quite a bit, and I think there's a lot of great shots in it, like Boba Fett holding his father's helmet after the head falls out of it, and just lots of individual great little moments. You get to see Mace Windu actually do something, which is nice.
Oh yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of the fight scene when the Jedi first arrive, and Mace Windu deflects some Jango blaster bolts, and then he just jumps off the balcony, like, and then the music picks up. John Williams' score in this movie, I think, is my favorite part of this movie. I think we do have to talk about music for at least a little bit, because I would say the soundtrack of Attack of the Clones is pretty freaking flawless.
I can't pick out a specific one off the top of my head. It's been a few weeks since I've seen these. I can say, going just prequels in general, though, that for me personally, Duel of the Fates is my favorite piece of Star Wars music.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people would be right there with you. There's a lot that the music does for this movie that even bolsters some of the bad parts. Like the Anakin and Padme love theme is really excellent, and it plays a few times throughout the movie. And there are just other movies that play up the noir aesthetic, but they're also, big boisterous symphonies for the battles. Music is doing a lot of legwork in this movie, like it does for every Star Wars film. But I just feel, since this is the weakest film for me, I just feel it carrying even more of the film, right? But I will say that I agree with you. Like, seeing a bunch of like actors who are extras, like swinging around lightsabers, is too much for me. Like in the Clone Wars TV show and Revenge of the Sith, they never have like 30 or 50 Jedi in one room like swinging lightsabers, because there's just something about that just doesn't look right, because you expect every Jedi to have like finesse and style and grace with their movements. I'll tell you, when there are 50 people on screen swinging a lightsaber in some of those shots, like, it just looks like a bunch of nobodies got, handed a lightsaber, and it looks kind of lame.
Yeah, that is the thing. And I think there are good fights in this. You brought up Obi-Wan and Jango Fett earlier. And the climaxes with Christopher Lee and Yoda, like, it's weird with Yoda because, like, you almost don't want to see his character fight. You almost want the mystery retained. But people forget, like, this redefined Yoda as a character, especially for kids, where it's like, oh, Yoda's a badass. This is the first time you see Yoda flipping around, and he's got his little lightsaber, and he has his own fight style completely different from Christopher Lee's, which is different than Anakin's, which is different from Obi-Wan's. And, I mean, it's a goofy climax. I mean, it's silly, but it works for what it is, yes. I think. It's not the best, but ultimately... It's
definitely the weakest climax of the 3 prequels, I would say. By a long shot, but at the same time, I don't think it has to be the strongest. It's definitely unique in what it's trying to do. Count Dooku, Christopher Lee, Count Dooku, he doesn't show up. And I actually, when I watched the movie last year, I paused it on Disney Plus to see the exact timestamp for when his character first shows up. It's like at the hour 40-minute mark. He doesn't show his face until like 100 minutes into the film. And for the screen time he is given, he is a really enigmatic presence, and he does excellent. And there's a lot of, Clone Wars TV show. There's an audio drama called Dooku Jedi Lost that gets into his origin story. He's a really awesome character. You just don't get a lot of him in these movies, unfortunately.
Yeah, I totally agree. And of course, when you get some prestige like Christopher Lee in the role, that adds a lot of weight to it. But he's a fun character. He's underutilized, but I do like his role in both of these movies that he is featured prominently in.
He's just such a unique villain. He kind of brings this political cunning to like the role, whereas Darth Maul was just pure aggression, and Count Dooku almost acts like he is the hero of his story in so many moments. And the Clone Wars TV show gets into it a lot about how the Separatists are not just evil droids trying to like shoot people up. They see the Republic as corrupt. And oh boy, we would learn that it was quite corrupt by Revenge of the Sith time. There's actually more nuance to that story that I think should have attempted to be told in this movie. They just didn't tell. He's kind of like the political figure for leading that movement. Because most people don't think Count Dooku is a Sith Lord. Most people think he is a politician. I mean, his name is Count Dooku. He does not have he does have a Darth moniker, Darth Tyrannus, but it's not like, it's like his alter ego, right? So, I don't know. He's a very interesting character. His duel in this film kind of sucks, though, because if you look at his duel with Anakin, half of the duel is like really close-up shots of Hayden and Christopher Lee swinging their lightsabers like glow sticks in a rave, and it's kind of lame. Like, you compare that to the stuff with Darth Maul in the last movie, and it is just night and day difference.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's a good point. I think
the Yoda stuff is like fun. It's like an unsatisfying orgasm. Like it's like you wanted to see it, and it can't be as good as you want it to be. It still happened, and it's like they couldn't resist, right? So they had to do it.
Yeah,
it is what it is.
You finally got that girl that you've been pining after naked, and her body's just not quite what you wanted it to be, but you still got
her body actually looks like Yoda's shriveled naked body.
So. I don't even know if that's I don't know if men have that in them, where like they get someone they're into naked, like, oh. Like they have to be terrible. It has to be like
we just invented it, so
maybe have to be like basket case or something. It's like another like head there or something. But
well, I want to talk about my least favorite part of this movie, which we kind of danced around, because this movie is absurdly complicated. Like when you get to the actual plot. Because Obi-Wan's stuff on the surface is like, ooh, it's cool and Noir-esque and it's interesting. But when you like actually look at the chain of events, they're talking about this completely separate character named Sifo Dyas, who, by the way, you never meet in the prequels. He has like a little bit of backstory in one Clone Wars episode in the TV show, and a little bit of stuff in some novels. But that was only created like 10 years or more after this film. Sifo Dyas is literally a character who you never see, never know anything about, and they expected like 5-year-old kids to like understand how this character who they've never heard about missioned an army for the good guys, but is actually part of the plot of the bad guys. Like, it does not make any like logical sense at all, and it's just convoluted for the sake of being convoluted, and I really just am always frustrated with it.
Yeah, and I think that's where you could tell these movies were like written in a rush or something by Lucas. Like, I think this one was more polished than Phantom
Or they
Menace,
accepted George Lucas's first draft because the crew around him like never told him no.
Yeah, like, I don't know. Like, I think that he would never really intended to make the movies, or he always like put it off. It was always a later date situation that when that date came, he's like, uh-oh. And
yeah, that's definitely what it feels like.
And I think each film he gets a little more polished and receptive to what people say to it, but I don't know. My thoughts on the movies generally with the overarching plot is I just go with the broad brushstrokes, watching it this time at least. Like, quite frankly, like, I didn't give a shit about the political intrigue. Like, I watched, it's like, okay, got it. I get the gist of it. I didn't put two thoughts together for it. I just followed it as much as I could without having to overthink it. And like with a movie like it's written and with a budget this big, like it should be well thought out. It should make sense and you should want to. But like, I don't know, for me personally, I never cared as a kid. I don't much care as an adult. If it was like I watched The Godfather Part 2 again recently, and I was paying attention to the scenes and watching them thinking like, okay, so when Michael does this, he already knows what the other character is or is not responsible for, but he's testing them to see how they react so that he can then, you know, like you're watching it thinking 2 steps ahead of a game of chess or something. And that's fascinating, and that's great acting and directing and writing. I know that this film is not The Godfather Part 2. So, like...
No, it is not.
I just kind of didn't want to give myself the headache this time around. So I'm not sparing the film that criticism, but it didn't affect my viewing experience much more simply because I chose not to let it, for whatever that's worth.
Oh, that's totally fair. I mean, it's not a movie that's meant to be an overthink piece, right? But at the same time, just like being convoluted is like unnecessary. Like they could have written things simpler. So the fact that, I don't know, I think George is just kind of lost in his headspace. And I think that's most evident in this movie of any of the movies.
I think he's, you know, like people don't quite get this, but for instance, David Lynch, there's a documentary called The Art Life, and he's talking about before he got famous, and he took Roadkill, and he was like watching it. He had like in his basement, and he's watching Decompose or whatever, and he had his father over, and he showed his dad, and he's excited, and he's going up the stairs, and he's going to drive his dad to the airport so his father could go home. And his dad said, "David, can you do me a favor?" And Lynch said, "What?" His dad said, "Don't ever have kids." And like we forget that with these famous artists, like a lot of them are strange people. And that's what really comes out in the prequels to me more than anything, is like George Lucas is a visionary. He's innovative. He's brilliant in many ways. And yet in other ways, it's like, what the fuck? You know?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that is part of the charm at the same time for those of us who are truly Star Wars fans deep down, is like, if you can appreciate some of the off-the-wall assets of this universe, that just kind of makes you appreciate it more, even if like even your rational brain is like not really condoning it, you know?
Oh yeah, I mean, I personally agree. I don't think it makes them, like, I get why people don't like it. I get why they'd say it's a bad movie for having those limitations, because at times they are crippling. But I find them fascinating, just as someone who's interested in George Lucas as a person.
Right, and I feel the same way. I think this movie still has like more good than bad, just because if you add up all of the artists, all of the musicians, all of the people who put something into this film, there's still so much creativity to behold. And that's kind of, you know, it's a crutch, but it is a crutch of fantasy in Star Wars. Like you said, you know, it was a trailblazer for the way a big blockbuster, you know, movie looks in the 21st century. So I think I would give it like a 6 out of 10. You know, I'd still have it over the halfway mark.
Yeah, I would probably go 6.5 or 7. It doesn't matter for me either. Like, just depending on how generous I feel. Like, I overall like this movie. It has a lot of good, but it's just got a lot of bullshit and a lot of boring bullshit, even worse. Like, Phantom Menace is a lot of bullshit, but it's always interesting to me. If it's like, oh, what were they thinking? Or I genuinely like it and think it's great. Or it's just like cringe or just weird. Just weird sometimes. This movie is boring for like probably at least half an hour of it, and probably more. And that's a big issue for me.
Yeah, I would say more than a half hour. I mean, this is like a 2.5 hour movie almost. So I would absolutely say that much, if not an hour, honestly.
Another thing for
a lot of runtime, dedicated to some pretty dry stuff. And, you know, if it was dry stuff that was executed in some like tasteful, artful way, then that'd be one thing. But it's also the weakest parts of the movie. that is that dry, boring stuff.
Yeah, and one thing I have to say with rewatching like the movies, I watched all 9 of them within like the span, I will say 2 weeks roughly, maybe 3 at the most, but I'm positive it was under 3. And this was a movie that I was finally kind of exhausted on Star Wars. All the others I was having fun. It was like, okay, there's a lot of movies, but I'm enjoying it. And then I got to this one, and I was like, oh, fuck. I don't know. Like, I wanted to watch Revenge of the Sith, but, like, I was kind of demoralized at this point. This was the point where I was like, I'll probably enjoy it, but I don't want to.
Right. I still stand firm that Attack of the Clones is my least favorite film of the saga. So it's a little bit of a spoiler for my future reviews, but I would say it's got the most, clear-cut problems out of all the films. But still enjoy it, still like it as part of the saga. I have to say, did Revenge of the Sith pick you back up a little bit?
Oh, a ton. I really, really enjoyed this movie watching it. I really, like I said, I was kind of disappointed in the first time I watched it. I think, like, it was weird. Like, when Mace Windu was killed off, I was just like, oh. And then just kind of stopped caring the rest of the movie. Like,
You're just so much of a Samuel L. Jackson fan, even as a child.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a weird thing as a kid, but I don't know. I liked the purple lightsaber or something. But I don't know.
The story behind that, right? His purple lightsaber.
Didn't he ask for one?
He just wanted one, and George was like, okay.
That's what I thought.
So that's the story. That's the whole story. But I just find that very charming.
I do like that. I wanted one too, so I relate. But yeah, like, I really, like, from the beginning of the movie, I was having a fucking blast. I thought it was great. It totally picked me back up. Like I said, I did not want to watch this movie when I watched it, but it won me over almost immediately, and it carried through to the end. I really only have very minor issues with the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people would agree. This is by far the best of the prequel trilogy. And for me, Revenge of the Sith, I would say the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy, their second installment is the dark, gritty, where all the drama is located kind of film. But I would say that's the third film, the trilogy capper, because if you look at it in terms of George Lucas's 6 movies, Revenge of the Sith is the Empire Strikes Back in terms of tone, whole like saga. At least it was at the time, 2005. There's a lot to be said. It's still a George Lucas written movie, but it's got a lot of consistency in tone. The pacing is the best of the 3 films in this trilogy by far. I think they finally know how to not completely boring, even though there are still several scenes where characters are just talking. Every time they are just talking in this film, it actually feels important. There's a lot of stuff with Anakin being asked to spy on the Chancellor, him talking to Padme about their child is going to be born, which will later be twins, and just everything. I don't know. The acting is better. I think the direction is better. The writing isn't masterful by any design, but like you said, when you're talking about Attack of the Clones, it's like 1,000 times better than how dry like cardboard it was in that movie. So, I mean, everything has been improved here, I would say.
Yeah, including the CGI, which I have to give some credit for. They definitely improved that. I think there's some points, like, I get it, because they want to create the hellscape, but, like, the final battle between Obi-Wan and Anakin at the end, parts of it are kind of marred by the CGI being limited. But for its time, it was great. Looking at it, I don't know how long later, a decade later or so, it doesn't quite hold up.
The special effects knock you right out of the park immediately. The first 2 prequels kind of have sleepy beginnings, and this movie does not.
Oh no, the opening to this movie is one of the best scenes of the entire series, including the original trilogy.
It's kind of like 25 minutes of nonstop Star Wars. Like, it's got everything. It's got characters being quippy assholes to each other. It's got R2-D2 saving the day. It's got space battles. It's got lightsaber battles. It's got like 3 villains on screen, like in the first 25 minutes. I honestly accomplished an incredible amount of legwork in the intro sequence to this film.
And the thing is that what I hate is that within those 20 minutes, it establishes the prequel trilogy that I think everybody wanted. Whether they're like me and didn't know that that's what they wanted, like people who grew up on Phantom Menace or people who grew up with the original trilogy who were dissatisfied. I think the first 25 minutes of the movie and the relationship between Anakin and Obi-Wan, the sense of pacing, the sense of scale, the lightsaber battles, I think it was pretty much exactly what everybody wanted, aside from a few people who I don't want to say like will never be pleased, but just don't identify with anything in this trilogy. I think this is by far the closest to accomplishing what fans wanted.
I agree. I think they wanted a dynamic between main characters that Luke, Han, and Leia had. And you don't really get that on the main characters in the first 2 movies because they're either separated, like Anakin, Padme, and Obi-Wan, or the main characters are changing. Like it was, one of the main characters was Qui-Gon in the first film. So there wasn't a lot of room for chemistry to be built amongst these characters, which I must say, to plug the Clone Wars animated series, if that's what you want out of the prequel era, then the Clone Wars is mandatory viewing. It's a long show. It's got 7 seasons, but there is so much of that, like Anakin, Obi-Wan brotherly relationship, so much more of the legwork of Anakin's fall of the dark side and just what the Clone Wars actually means as like a period of galactic history. Just so much storytelling in that show. And it's kind of unfortunate because the way the trilogy is structured, like Clone Wars don't even begin until the end of the 2nd movie. And then they're over midway through the 3rd movie. So there is a lot of content. There's a lot of cool stuff. And you get the feeling that a lot of cool stuff happened in between episodes 2 and 3, just with how chaotic the beginning of the 3rd movie is.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen, you had me watch the last 4 episodes of the Clone Wars, and I definitely get a sense of what you're saying with it. I haven't seen anything else of it.
We'll talk about those episodes, I think, after we finish our discussion on this film, since it's so inherently tied with this film. But just talking on this film in general, your little child heartbreak, like when Anakin did fall to the dark side and Order 66 happened.
I think I was too tired to like care when I saw the drive-in, like, because it's a fairly long movie and I was younger, so I think I was just tired, to be honest. And I just like stopped caring halfway through because like, oh.
Did your adult heartbreak then?
A little bit, but like I hate to say it, but it's like you ever have a thing where you listen to maybe an album and it's supposed to be a sad album. I don't know, like a Bon Iver album or something, and you want it to break your heart, but you're just not connecting with it like you want to. So like you feel like you're trying to hurt, but it's just not there. It's a little bit inorganic or forced. I kind of felt that way because like as much as I liked the relationship in this movie, I know that it could have been done better in the others. I know that it could have been more powerful, but it still worked. Like it's not like, I don't want to say like it was a total misfire for me, because it wasn't. I think within the context of the movie on its own, which is a perfectly valid way to view these movies as individual films, of course, because that's what they are, even though they are also part of a trilogy. I still think it works. I still think it's sad, but I definitely think it could have been more powerful because these just could have been better movies. And unfortunately, even this movie, which is pretty damn good, it still suffers from that, unfortunately, for me.
I think there are definitely moments that could be executed a bit better. I think when he does turn to the dark side, the suddenness of it is kind of like a light switch being turned on and off, which I think could have been explored a bit differently, perhaps. But at the same time, there is kind of this just rising sense of finality that this movie has, and it's like closing that loop finally, and you know that a lot of certain things do have to happen. So So like the last hour of this film, it's just kind of like, it's a continuous, fall from grace until it gets worse and worse and worse. It's kind of satisfying in a complete opposite way than Return of the Jedi's Luke and Vader duel is. Light's going to win the day in the end. But this really, I think, taught me as a kid, like, why prequels can be interesting inherently, because there are certain things have to happen. That does make you guess what is going to happen or how it's going to happen. Anakin's going to end up being Darth Vader. But you didn't quite know before this film that they fought on a volcano planet for like 30 minutes, and it was one of the coolest fights ever, right?
Yeah, and I think there's also just a general sense of doom and dread in this film, because that it's all going to go to shit. That things are going to wind up bad. And I think the film it's not a total downer. I mean, you get the birth of Luke and Leia at the end. You get you find out Qui-Gon's a Force ghost. That's kind of neat. There's hope at the end, but generally speaking, you made a good point with the parallelism where, like, instead of Return of the Jedi being very satisfying and happy, this one's the exact opposite in most ways, where it's bittersweet, but it mostly is on the bitter side this time around. And that's very satisfying, and as an ending to the Lucas 6 films, and really for what I always wanted, I think just like to close the loop on Star Wars there and say, okay, it's full circle now. I think it's very satisfying. I mean, it's silly when Darth Vader's like, no, but I don't mind, because I love the memes about it. It makes me laugh. It's kind of like overdone, but
right.
It's at least overdone. It's cheesy in a fun way, which is how a lot of the flaws of this movie are, where it's just corny in a boring way. It's just stale in Attack of the Clones.
Right, exactly. If it's gonna be dorky like Star Wars often is, then at least make it fun. I think the fact that this movie can balance being really fun, also being very dreadful, is pretty awesome. It's definitely a more impressive feat in terms of like writing than either of the first two movies pull off, in my opinion.
Yeah, and we get major set pieces at the beginning, which we talked about enough already. We get the lizard fight, which that's the one part where the CGI doesn't quite hold up as well again for me. The lizard just looks kind of weird. Generally, the Lucas designs for creatures and ships is very interesting and strange in these movies. Not always in a good way, but that, I don't know, some of the lizard just...
You're talking about the lizard that Obi-Wan is riding?
Yeah.
I love her. She is awesome. They're called Varactals. There, I'll tie you something today.
Yeah, I'll keep that in mind.
Yes, keep it in mind. Her name is Baga, and my brother always picks on me. Obi-Wan gets shot down off that cliff, and my brother was always like, yeah, that creature you love so much, she died. I'm like, no, she didn't. She can swim. Like, we don't know for sure.
I'm sure there's a Wikipedia on it.
I'm sure there's confirmation somewhere. Did this creature live or die? But
yeah.
Just like little details and funny things like that like you cannot give two shits about, but you can also gravitate towards it if you want. Like, I don't know, really cool sense of Star Wars when you can focus on any one detail. I mean, we get to see more of the Jedi in action, even if it's in really short clips, either in Order 66 or some of the lightsaber fights. I mean, there are 5 lightsaber duels this movie, and that is a way bigger number than any of the other movies individually, which is just something cool. And they're all good, I would say. Some of them are short, but they're all better, in my opinion, than, say, Anakin versus Count Dooku in the last movie.
Yeah, definitely. And once again, like, there's not 50 Jedi on screen at once. Like, even when, you get the scene where the Jedi are confronting Palpatine, and there's like maybe 6 or 7. It's all very well choreographed. It's well shot. You can see everybody who you're supposed to. There's focus, and it's entertaining. It's never overkill, right. Despite, like, there's a lot that happens in this movie, whereas the other movie, really a lot happens right at the end, in the beginning. This film, it's just firing on all cylinders the entire time. It is a total blockbuster, while also somehow being kind of a downer. And one thing I got to bring up is I love that we get instead of the Ewoks, we get the Wookiees for the climax of this one. Not nearly as much of a focus, but there's definitely some attention given there with some
forest animal redemption.
Yeah, we do get the thing with Yoda where he's like, "Goodbye, Chewbacca, my friend," or something ridiculous. I don't mind.
Yeah, what do you think about Yoda like knowing Chewbacca?
It makes the galaxy seem much smaller. I don't give a shit.
I never think about it, but then that scene happens, and I'm like, oh my god, they're friends. Like, can you imagine Empire Strikes Back if things had happened differently and like those versions of the characters were like talking to each other? Like, can you even fathom that? Because it's kind of hard to.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't know. It's a weird thing for me, and it's probably a bad decision on Lucas's part, but I don't personally care.
That feels like the most fan fiction-y kind of thing. Like, yeah, Yoda and Chewbacca know each other. It's like, okay, well, that's whatever.
Yeah, it feels like a cartoony thing. Like if it was on like a Saturday morning cartoon, like in this episode, Yoda and Chewbacca have to team up.
Right. But honestly, if that's the biggest cartoony gripe I can have with the film, then I would say that's pretty solid. So I can't even really be like mad about it. I think it's humorous.
Yeah, I'm not upset by it. I'm just kind of mildly curious, where it's just kind of funny.
Yeah, like what was George's thought process here, I guess.
Yeah, it's just a little nice fan service moment that probably only pleased him.
Yeah. I mean, it pleased me as a kid. I thought it was cool as a kid, but as an adult, I think it's silly. So, I mean, it is what it is, and that goes, when this movie is such a bummer, I think you need the kind of Yoda with Chewbacca moments for the kids, right? Like, this movie's a bummer. So, I mean.
Yeah, exactly. And I do remember that scene as a kid. I remember seeing it like, oh, that's cool. Chewbacca's here.
Right, exactly. And that's really all it's meant to do. That's really all it's meant to be. There is a deleted scene that I really like in this movie, and it doesn't get any attention because it's a deleted scene. You know how in the end of the film where they're wrapping everything up, Bail Organa had adopted Leia, and Luke gets dropped off, and they were talking about Qui-Gon's ghost, and then Darth Vader is all pissy. There's also a scene where, like, Yoda, shoots off in his escape pod, and he lands on Dagobah, and it's like a fully finished CGI scene. It doesn't make Dagobah like look bad or anything, but it's a deleted scene that exists, and it's like 10 seconds long. I just feel like they should have included it in the movie because I feel like it would have been like, it's full circle even more.
Yeah, that would have been cool. I wonder why they cut that of all things.
Yeah, it's like super short, so I was always confused as to why they didn't include it as a kid when I was like going through the special features. I was like, because there are other deleted scenes that definitely make sense to have been deleted because it's a pretty long movie. That being said, this movie is almost as long as Attack of the Clones.
It feels like half as long.
Right, it feels half as long, and that's what, again, the impressive nature of the pacing in this film. Like you said, things just constantly keep happening. But there are also quiet moments of reflection, like with a lot of the scenes between Anakin and Palpatine. I will say that Ian McDiarmid is at his absolute best as an actor in this film, because the Emperor is definitely in all three prequels and in Return of the Jedi, and maybe another movie that we'll talk about at some point. But he's at his absolute best, I would say, in Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, I think I personally like him best as Return, but I just think about him more in Return of the Jedi, because of the significance of his role in that, rather than his capabilities as an actor, if that makes sense. Like, he's used the best in that one, but you get the full range of everything here, and he's great in it, and the transformation's satisfying and fun. His fight with Yoda's fun, I think, at the end. They're literally tearing up the Senate.
I know. I always get, you really like the zoom in and zoom out, kind of docu-nature. And they do that when, like, they pop up the middle hole of the Galactic Senate chamber. Just really good symbolism. I mean, it's corny, it's cheesy, it's very, Flash Gordon-y, I guess. But I like it a lot. It kind of is like comic relief almost, in a way, where it's like a lot of the drama is being handled in the Anakin Obi-Wan duel. So it's kind of like a comic relief, even though it's not funny. It's just kind of like a relief to see Yoda and Palpatine fight, I guess, because you know that they are, you know, they're not going to get seriously maimed, scarred for life emotionally, like the characters in the other duel. They're just going to fight.
Yeah, and even though it may be on the nose, like that kind of visual storytelling is just so Lucas-esque with like in Attack of the Clones, Anakin getting trapped in the machine on the conveyor belt, you know, foreshadowing that he will eventually become trapped in a machine. And
Right.
you know, in this one, them tearing up the Senate, like it's very in line with the nature of the series, and it doesn't bother me, and I had fun with it. And as a kid, that was one of the more exciting bits of the movie.
Star Wars is not meant to be subtle.
If it is, it doesn't do the best job.
No, it's very grand and archetypal, and you know, I don't think kids can really get a grasp on you know, more artsy natures, and like these films are, you know, very artistic in many ways. So I think that's why we as adults tend to maybe want them to be higher brow than they are. But again, George always said, like, these movies are made for kids, and we would just kind of like brush off certain criticisms with that excuse. And it's probably a good thing to brush off certain criticisms, not all criticisms, with that excuse, but it does have a point.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I mean, this is definitely my favorite of the new trilogy, and I would say it's probably my third favorite in the series. I do like this more than Return of the Jedi, personally. I think it's a better ending on almost every count, especially
I agree with
considering
that. It's also my third favorite film overall.
especially considering that this is the best of its respective trilogy, whereas Return's the worst of its. It makes it almost a no-brainer for me to say that this is my third favorite.
And there are three trilogy cappers, and I would say this is by far the best of the three trilogy cappers as well.
Yeah, and I think that's not something you get very often in series ever. I mean, the second act is usually the one that people like the most. It's where you're running, you have the momentum from the first movie, but you don't have the responsibility to wrap things up. So it's got a natural benefit there. So
which just proves that the prequel trilogy is weird in yet another way, right? That like the second movie is the worst.
Exactly, yeah. So it's very strange and interesting, and you know, it makes me happy that even though it took 3 movies to get there, maybe not for me personally, being a Phantom Menace fan, but just generally speaking, for Lucas to finally get it right in the third one and make a genuinely great Star Wars movie is just so satisfying and heartwarming. And you know, like if he had to sign off on the series, I think it was the best note that he could have at that point in his career.
No, I completely agree. Everything falls into place the way it should be, and there's just kind of something satisfying about that.
So as far as a rating goes for me, I'm gonna give it an 8.5. I could maybe go to 9, but that just feels a little generous, and honestly just dismissing a little bit too many of the minor flaws in the movie. Just weird CGI stuff, clunky dialogue, you know, the usual suspects in this trilogy. So I'm going to say 8.5 for me.
Yeah, that's fair. Being the shell I am, I think I am going to go for the full 9. Because there's really not much that bothers me when I watch this movie, and there's definitely some more minor flaws. But yeah, no, it's just a good damn time. It's as far as blockbusters like 2005 or earlier, this is one of the best examples that I can think of.
Yeah, I mean, it really stands out, and it's a movie that gets better for me every time I see it, even though I've only seen it in full twice. Even when I see like 20 minutes here, half an hour there, even as a kid in like middle school or high school, as I got older, I was just like, you know, every time I see a little more of this movie, I like it more and more, and I bet if I rewatch it, I'd like it. And then rewatching it finally in full again, unless I'm forgetting some other time, I was like, yeah, I love this movie. This is great.
I'm glad that you had that experience, because I definitely realizes, I think, the potential of what the prequel era can be and could be. So at least they got there before they finished, right?
Yeah, and I'm glad I had that experience too, because it'd be funny if I had for like a decade, if not longer. Maybe I'd like this if I rewatch it. I kind of think I'll like this, and I watch it for like 15 years, like, nope, sucks.
That
Maybe a
was
bit
my
of an
least favorite.
anticlimax.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess I did request viewers that Todd do a little extra viewing because one of my favorite pieces of Star Wars is the Clone Wars animated series, and it was a long time coming because that show was on for 5 seasons on Cartoon Network from 2008 to 2013. And when Disney bought Star Wars, they canceled the show. They released some lost episodes, a season on Netflix. But then they had a final season or more of content that they wanted to make. And that finally came out last year on Disney Plus. And the last 4 episodes of the show tied together some of the cartoons characters and what was going on with them during the events of Revenge of the Sith. And I wanted to hear what your like just general thoughts were on it, coming from the perspective of someone who didn't watch the Clone Wars growing up, didn't really know anything about the rest of the show, and just what your thoughts on that were.
Yeah, generally it's a weird thing because, you know, watching the end of any TV show you've never seen is kind of a strange experience, let alone one on for 7 years. But I always like watching the conclusion of TV shows and everything. And it was weird for me because, you know, like the animation style has a certain, I don't want to say cheapness, but datedness to it. Just the specific style it went for and everything with the kind of CGI, polygon looking, like Obi-Wan's beard and stuff like that is clearly stylized in a...
Dude, it was even more polygonal in the earlier seasons. Like, it looks incredible in comparison to some of the earlier stuff.
Yeah, you can tell it's a
distinct art style.
It's a deliberate thing now, at least. But it's got a lot of very impressive things too, in the way they use the camera, well, the animated, you know, the metaphorical camera, framing and doing all that, and doing the action scenes, the pacing, the fact that they cram so much into the episodes. There's a lot of plot twists, especially with Darth Maul, his character's motivation. And all that stuff. I mean, it's well put together, I think. You know, I mean, on one hand, I didn't grow up with it, so I'm an adult, you know, quickly approaching 30, watching a children's cartoon, which I'm not above in any way. I put off watching Scooby-Doo for a few nights to watch this, so I'm not, you know, it's not like I had to pause my Tarkovsky movie to watch this. But like, you know, I thought it was well put together. I'm sure, like, if I was a kid watching it, or if I had a kid and they were watching it, it'd probably be very satisfying. But generally, like, just seeing it, and from my perspective, it was like, okay, cool, I respect that. That's neat.
Right. So, did you know about any of those like characters? Did you know about Anakin's Padawan, Ahsoka Tano, or like even tangentially hearing about her, or his clone captain Rex? Or the revival of Darth Maul and how Darth Maul came back. Did you know like any background of that, or did you just go into this like blind, you know, completely?
Yeah, so I don't know the names, and I'm not gonna try to remember. So the orange lady, I knew about her because, like, you know, you see her on the toy boxes and the commercials and stuff like that. So like she was kind of hard to avoid, especially with the Mandalorian and her character making a live action appearance there. And and the Darth Maul stuff, I had seen just bits and pieces of it, just incidentally, what was on Cartoon Network if I was at a friend's house with a younger sibling or whatever. And I knew that Darth Maul was back, and he had weird spider legs or something for a while.
Did for a time, yes.
So like I knew about some of that stuff. I didn't know about, I think Rex, you said, was the commander chief guy. I didn't know about him, or generally I don't know much about the show. But what was interesting to me is just the tone of it and how they managed to make it feel both like the prequels and like what people probably would have wanted from the prequels, or what they liked in the originals. I thought that it got a good balance of both.
Right. And I think that's the kind of the best that you could really praise the show for, you coming as an outsider, was that you felt that, because I think the Clone Wars, a lot of its best episodes do have that kind of a original trilogy kind of hero's journey kind of banter feel, while also managing the setting and the tone of the prequels. It's a long ass show. There's a lot, and there's a lot of episodes that are also important, to the overall Star Wars story. But again, it's for the fans who want to delve into that universe like an absolute crap ton. Yeah, I feel like it's a very good complementary piece to Revenge of the Sith. I mean, since I'm a huge Star Wars shill, like Order 66 was more impactful for me, for watching these characters having to like fight each other. Who you've grown to, they've been interacting for 7 seasons worth of television. Yeah, no, you definitely have a different perspective, but the fact that it didn't lose you completely, even though it was like the last 4 episodes of a 140 episode show, is good.
It shows how little you had to watch the other 136 episodes.
Well, and that's kind of the nice part about the Clone Wars is that it's a very anthology based show. Like, you'll get episodes where it's like, oh, Kit Fisto, the dude with the green dreadlocks that got killed in like 1 second in Revenge of the Sith, he has like a full episode of television. So it's got a very unique nature. And there's some other Star Wars cartoons and shows that don't quite have that anthology nature. So it's not like necessarily that it's filler. It's just telling very different stories like every 2, 3, or 4 episodes.
Yeah, that makes sense. And especially being a children's cartoon that's on Cartoon Network when it first aired, like, people forget that back then in 2008, we didn't have streaming like we do today. So if you caught it or you didn't, maybe you'd DVR it if you had that back then, which I don't even think was that common.
Right.
So of course it makes sense. You want easy entry points, and you want it to be easily followable.
Exactly. Yeah, it does that very well. No, I'm glad that you watched it for me. You're the best.
Well, are you ready to sum up this episode and end it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think both of us are pretty big fans of the prequels, and even for their flaws, which I would say are overstated by a lot of people, there's still that level of respect and that the faith in the series that the creators had very strong. And Star Wars is Star Wars, but it's definitely a very different era in the prequel trilogy, for better and worse, I would say.
Yeah, it's very unique. It's very innovative. It's very flawed, and I appreciate it for all those things. And I'm not gonna pretend like it's as good as the original trilogy. I'm not gonna pretend like any of them are as good as Empire or A New Hope. But like, right, there's a lot of good there, and I get why they have had, past tense, I think, the reputation that they once did. And I also think there's good reason that people now are coming around and saying, you know what, there were some issues, but there's also a lot that we should be appreciating too. And I think it's a very unique piece of art, and that's really all I ask of entertainment. Is it, if I'm watching something and it feels unique or it feels personal, then that's the best thing that I could say. And I truly don't think that anybody else could have made these films but George Lucas, which ironically is why he did. He asked Spielberg, he asked, I think, Ron Howard, and some other people to make this trilogy, and they all basically said, no, you got to do it. And so, they probably weren't right. They probably would have been better movies if he had served as producer, like on Empire or Return. But like, it worked out in its own way, and I really appreciate that. And I don't own these movies. I want to get a nice Blu-ray set, but I was always holding out because I was hoping that we get the theatrical cuts of the original trilogy. But that hasn't happened. But I'll put it this way: like, if I ever buy these movies and just drop the dough, and I haven't because they're so easy to find on streaming, it's not really, every so many years when I watch them, I can find them. But whenever I do finally buy the Star Wars movies, I will make sure to definitely get these 6.
It's definitely something that left an impact on us since we grew up with it as well. But I'm glad that we got to ruminate and give our thoughts on it.
Yep. So next time you hear from us, we'll be talking about the sequel trilogy, of course. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I'll be Todd Crawford.
I will be Eric Zavinski.
And we'll be Too Cool for the Comic Shop.